Hey, my name's TC Burr. Welcome to Yet, a podcast created to encourage you to get your goal or idea out of your head and into reality. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you write your book, start your business, launch your podcast, or whatever it is you hope to accomplish. Because it's not that you haven't done it, it's just that you haven't done it yet. My guest today is Shonda Ramsey. Shonda, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. So typically what I like to do on this show is I like to invite my guests to do their own introductions. I think it's super cool to hear from people in their own words. And so to start us off, could you kind of just share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I am Shonda Ramsey, and I am what I like to call a multifaceted entrepreneur. So I have been an entrepreneur for quite a long time now. To be honest with you, I don't know that I could tell you the full years it's been that long, but I mostly focus on graphic design. I do a podcast, I'm an author, and all those things together. So it's just been a lot of fun to do that, working with other authors and small business owners as well.
That does sound like a lot of fun. And it sounds like you've got your hands in a lot of different things. So talk to me about kind of how you ended up doing some of the things that you're doing. Is this like growing up when you vision like what you want to be when you grow up? Did you always know you wanted to be I think you called it a multifaceted entrepreneur? Is this kind of a career path that's evolved for you? Talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so I grew up in a family who also had a entrepreneurial background. So it has been part of my life since I was younger, just kind of getting to know that. But also my grandfather and my mother both worked in the printing industry. And so that really is where my love for all things stationery and printing began, was when I was younger. And that just kind of carried with me throughout. I did work in a corporate setting for quite some time. I was like an office manager. I also did a lot of marketing and design for them as well. And that was really what kind of got my foot in the door as far as design went. And then I got laid off in 2017. It was kind of a shock. I didn't know it was coming. And I decided to just go all in on myself with that kind of transition that I had. It was one of those do or die moments for me. At that time, I actually was launching a stationery brand. So I have greeting cards, a whole greeting card line that's out in stores now. And that was kind of where my focus started. And then from there, I've just continued to expand and grow and add on other things to it. So now I do the branding and I do book covers and book formatting as well, which kind of ties in the corporate part of it along with the fun aspect that I like too.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so walk me through kind of your mindset. You're working in the corporate setting, 2017. You get laid off, and this it sounds like was kind of the catalyst moment that really launched you into the entrepreneurial world. Even though you've got that background, your family has kind of been in that world, but this was the event that kind of launched you out. What was your like mindset? How did you process through that, and what ultimately led you to take that leap? Because that's a lot of people. I mean, it seems like getting laid off can be a scary thing, and like the last thing people would want to do is kind of venture out at that point. So talk a little bit about kind of mindset and how you got there.
Terrified would be the best word to come to mind.
Right. Yeah.
I remember leaving work and I was pretty devastated because it was a company that I really thought that I was going to retire from. Like that was my end
Mm.
game. I loved the company. It was a Christian-based company and their morals and everything like just really aligned with who I was and with my core values. I loved that they gave me a chance. I came in at like just kind of an assistant position, and they let me prove that I was able to do all these other things. So as other people left, I just kind of took on more roles and just kept advancing within the company. And so that was really my end goal. That was what I was wanting to do. So the day that I got laid off, I was devastated. It was really hard. And it took me a while to kind of get over that. And then
Mm.
as I was trying to get a new job, like it was really difficult. So something about me is I do not have a degree in anything. I never finished college. So that always has been a huge impact when you're applying for jobs. It's the number one thing that they always require. It didn't matter that I had 20 plus years experience. I didn't have a degree. And so that really stopped a lot of people from giving me a chance. And so I just kept getting frustrated with that. I did take on a part-time job for a little bit. I worked as an office manager for a interior design company, which that was a lot of fun. It ties in my love for design and things like that. But during that time, I was starting to get known for my stationery line simultaneously. And so it became a point where I had to make a decision of what was going to be best for me because I couldn't maintain both the part-time job and the demands for my brand that was coming out. And in addition, one of the stores that I was in had asked if they could hire me to do their marketing and their website and things like that as well. So it was kind of just a moment where I had to look and say, is part-time jobs what I want to do forever? Is corporate what I want to do forever? Or does it make more sense to become a freelancer and just freelance out my design skills? Because that's what these people are really hiring me for anyway. I was doing web design, social media, things like that. And so it just made sense to me to just transition it over to freelance. And I've not looked back since.
Okay, that's awesome. So you started off. It sounds like while you're doing the part time thing, you're doing the stationery business, and that's starting to really ramp up. Then you've got some of this freelance design work that you're being sought after for, and then over time you've also added. I'm assuming maybe you're still doing those things. You've also added a book that you've written, and you've
Mhm.
recently started a podcast as well. So talk about kind of how do you get to that point where okay, it's time to add something new, and how did you choose those specific things? Like what led you to write the book that you wrote, and what led you to start the podcast that you started, and just kind of help me understand the mindset of how you make those decisions.
Sure. So I'm going to start with podcast because this is actually my second podcast that I
Okay.
have launched. So my first podcast was with my best friend, and it was supposed to be on like friendship and just connection as general. And it was really a testing kind of moment that we both were going through to see if it was something that we wanted to do. And while we were doing that podcast, we were challenging each other to write again because we both had stopped writing. And so what we found was we loved writing. We'd forgotten how much we loved writing. And so that podcast kind of went away so that we could go all in on writing. And it started off where both of us were writing in the romance genre. And then as I was writing my book, I noticed that my story was coming out in my main character. And I had to stop writing because I'm like, this is not her story. This isn't supposed to be told this way. And then I had to really look inside of myself and think, why is this coming out now? This is stuff I said I would never talk about again. Like, this isn't really anything I'm comfortable sharing. I'm perfectly fine with never speaking of it again. And it would not go away. Every time I would sit down to write, it just kept coming up. So I abandoned that book and went all in on my book, which is called Authentically Anchored. And it really is a story of everything I have been through, all of the hardships, the ups, the downs, the highs, the lows, everything, and how I was able to come out of those and be rooted even stronger in faith. It was a moment where I lost everything and didn't know where to go because my life looked completely different than what I had ever envisioned it to look like. Aside from losing my job that same year, I also had a miscarriage. And so it was just a
Mm.
2017 is what I call the greatest year of loss for me. I lost so much in 2017. And in that, I lost who I was as well. And so just trying to find that person again, that's the book I wrote, is to help someone else be able to find who they are after all hope feels lost for them.
So you have this season of life where you're going through lots of challenges. You're laid off. You journey through this miscarriage, which I can only imagine is one of the most heartbreaking things a person could experience. And you later down the road, you're writing this fiction book, but you see more of your story keeps coming out as you're writing that fiction book, and so you feel led to like put that one on pause and go all in on this. Almost, would you describe it as kind of like a memoir, or like it's your personal journey, and I guess some of how you overcame those challenges or processed through that grief, right? Is it fair to call it a memoir, or
Yeah, so
what's
it's kind of a combination.
okay?
It's a combination of my story as well as a devotion. So each chapter I share scripture that I found that gave me comfort and helped me kind of overcome that area of life. I talk not just about like the miscarriage and things like that, but I also talk about loss of friendship
Mm,
as well. And I do talk a little bit about the loss of the job that I had, things like that. And then also rediscovering my passions, things that I maybe once loved as a child that I used to do, but have yet picked up again. And so I talk about how you can find out what your passions are now in your life as it stands now. And then my biggest overall message is on being authentically you. So God created us to be us, not to be someone else. And in today's world, it's so easy to want to be someone else. And so my message was very clear that, we're to celebrate who we are and who we were created to be. And we're to stand in that firmly anchored in Christ.
I love that. Yeah, God designed each of us uniquely, and He knows what it is we're supposed to be and do. And I love that. Just stay authentic to that, anchored in that. That's great. I love it. Okay, so help me fill in the timeline. So you wrote that book. When did that book get published?
I wrote the book last year and I published it this year. It
Oh,
got a
cool.
really speed. I put it through very quickly. But the thing about the book was I had already worked in the publishing industry. And so I kind of knew the process of what it would take to self publish a book. I had been researching it for
Hmm.
many years. And so I already knew what needed to be done. And I already had a team of editors as well in my corner. And so it made it easy to be able to pass it on. So I spent, I would say, about 6 total months from outline to and edited. Well, actually, it would be longer with editing. So from outline to the rough draft completion with my first pass of edits before I handed it off to an editor. And then I had two editors work on it at the beginning of last year, and I got it back, or this year, I'm sorry, the beginning of this year. And then I got it back like, I want to say it was May is when I got it back, and then we published in July. So that was when it finally came out.
Awesome. And you, since then, you're kind of, I think you mentioned before, you're kind of sharing this with, obviously, I'm assuming it's available for purchase where people buy books, but
Mhm.
also you're going to churches and connecting with groups and kind of sharing it there as well. I imagine this is something that's super helpful for people as they're walking through stuff of life. Like when people are going through, maybe it doesn't have to be exactly what you went through, but we all face challenges of various types of trials. And what a great thing it is to have a resource like this, to hear from somebody who's been through some stuff, kind of share
Mhm.
the reason for the hope that they have, and how they've kind of navigated that, and what the role that faith plays in all of that. So I just want to commend you. Like, not really a question, I just think it's super cool. I love when people kind of lean into the struggles and challenges that they face to try and help other people. It sounds like you very much have
Mhm.
accomplished that with this book. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, the book is very much so not an about me, it's an about you. So it's how you can get through your hardship. And I teach that by sharing how I did it for me. What I did may or may not work for someone else, but it at least should give hope to someone who's going through something.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you did the book. You said you had your initial podcast with your friend about kind of friendship, and you all kind of encouraged each other toward writing, and then you got into writing again, finished the book. Then but you also have another podcast that you're doing now, and it's
Mhm.
for indie authors, right? So talk a little bit about the evolution of that, how you got to starting doing that. Like it's cool to me to hear that you've got all these different kind of things going on. So I'm really curious to hear when did you decide to do that podcast, and what was that journey like?
Yeah, so As I've been working in and out of the publishing industry and just really connecting with other authors as well as industry professionals, when I was looking for resources, I had such a hard time finding them that I just kept a list of all the things I wish that there was
Mm,
so that I could then create those things. That's really like business 101, I think. If you see a need, you fill the need, right?
yeah.
So I just logged everything that I did step by step. And then as I was considering a podcast, I thought, you know what? Indie authors, they don't get a whole lot of opportunity. It's mostly the traditionally published who are getting the bigger opportunities than what the indie authors are. And I really felt like there was kind of a disconnect there for indie authors. And even as I would talk to people who were interested in writing a book, the reason why they didn't is just because they felt alone. They didn't know what to do. They
Mm,
couldn't, same thing, they couldn't find the resources. And so I thought, you know what? It would be such a neat thing to create a podcast that celebrated the voices of other indie authors. And so my podcast, Dear Indie Author, is just a one-on-one conversation, kind of like this, where I sit down and talk to other writers and industry professionals just to kind of hear their process. I've learned even so much from them, things that I would never have done or thought to try too. So it's really good, for myself personally, but also good for someone new who's wanting to write a book as well.
yeah, that's amazing. So very similar. I think there's a lot of overlap with your podcast and this one. I
Mhm.
started off really just wanting to encourage and inspire people who have a goal or a dream of something. And at first it was like, I started walking toward this dream that I've always had of writing a book. And so that was for me kind of the catalyst to like, I want to talk to more people who are writing books. And when I started telling people that I was doing that, they felt the freedom then to share with me about the cool things that they were doing. So some of them were starting companies or, wanting to do some type of side hustle, but many of them were writing books. Some were doing podcasts. And there was just kind of this energy and this excitement. And
Mhm.
my thought was like, I got to share that with other people. And so I've kind of leaned more lately into just focusing specifically on writing since that's what I'm doing. Um, but I think it's great to talk to people who are indie authors, and especially, in my case, people who are just kind of on the front end of that. Maybe they've,
Mhm.
just published their first book, or maybe a lot of them are even, before that, like they've just gone through a draft or they're doing editing or whatever. But I've learned so much. I've met so many really super talented and amazing people. And I always ask people like, what resources would you share that have helped you? And so I have like a running list of all these books and podcasts and things that like selfishly as someone who's trying to figure out how to write a book, it's been super valuable.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like there's so many great, amazing, creative people out there. And, the algorithms don't always favor those people, but they have
Mhm.
amazing stories to tell too. And so
Yes.
I'm super encouraged by the work that you're doing there. So how long has that podcast been going on?
It hasn't been out for that long, actually, just like maybe a month and a
Oh,
half.
wow.
So we're in season 1 now. It's still relatively new. What's really promising is the number of downloads has far surpassed my first podcast.
That's great.
So that's always great. I mean, you always want to see your numbers go up. And so that's been really, really great to see. And I also made the decision to put it out on YouTube as well. And so that has been slower to kind of gain traction, but it's starting to have more and more views as well too. So I think, just like with any podcast, consistency is key there. But yeah, for it being relatively new, it's doing really well.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Congratulations. So, one of the things that I love to do with this show, one of the main goals that I have is to encourage and inspire people who are kind of just getting started, or maybe who haven't started yet, but have an idea to write or to do something. Um, and I'm curious from I think a reason why many people don't do those things is because they don't have enough encourage. They've got the idea, they've got the dream, but then kind of life gets in the way and they think, oh, I could never do it. And then they don't have anyone kind of saying, no, you can. And here's why you should. So I'm curious from your perspective, what is, if you have any examples of like something that someone said to you, or something that has happened where you kind of look back to and say, man, that was such an encouraging moment, and I'm always going to hold on to that, that phone call that I got, or that thing that person said. Do you have any examples like that that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah. So in 2020, I first had the idea to write my book, the
Mm,
book that I just published. And I shared that with a few people who were close to me, and I was told that nobody cared and nobody wanted to hear it.
yikes.
And so I froze myself in time. And then I met another person who had written a book who said, not only is your story timely, it's something that so many people who are hurting and afraid to tell other people that they're hurting
Mm,
need to hear now, because you could help them come out of that place. And so, really listening to that advice was what got me thinking about it again. And while that was not said to me in 2020, it was said to me a couple years later, which is actually, I think, why my story then started coming out in the book that I was writing at the time, was because it was in my head again. I was thinking about it and thinking about what she said about, there's somebody out there who needs you. And
mm,
so, you know, if you hold on to that story and you don't share it, somebody is suffering and waiting for your story so that they can see the light to come out of that. And so just have hope and know that what you have to say is valued and valuable to them.
mm. Yeah, that's amazing. Um, okay, so question about how do you manage all of this stuff? Because I think some people might hear this and think, like, oh man, I've just started writing a book, and that by itself is so much, and I don't, it's
Mhm.
so hard to do. But here's this girl doing all this stuff. Like, how do you like, do you have like systems or hacks or processes to kind of manage your time, manage your day?
Mhm.
Like, what are some of the lessons you've learned maybe in terms of juggling everything? Talk a little bit about how you navigate all the cool things that you're doing.
Yeah. So remember, I started with a stationery brand.
Yes.
So I'm old school paper, pen kind of girl.
Love it. Love it.
I cannot do any of it without a planner.
Mm,
Like, you have to have a consistent schedule. And my planner is pretty robust. Of course, I created it, so it's perfect for what I need, and it's designed in a way that it keeps me on task and on target with all the different things that I'm doing. My favorite thing to do is time blocking. And so, what I do with time blocking is I set days for specific tasks. And then every day, every week, I do those tasks on that day. So for me, I'm a freelancer, I work from home, and I do have clients, so I have to fit in my client work in with everything else that I'm doing. So, Mondays may be my marketing days where I'm doing all my social media, all, the
mhm,
blog, the newsletters, all those things. But you just take all like things and you batch them all together, and you just do that consistently week over week. And it becomes like clockwork. And actually, you start to speed up, you get more efficient. And because you're so used to doing it, you just sit down and you know exactly what you got to do.
mm,
And so it's just easier to get it done. And then what that does over time is it frees up your extra time at the end of the day. And so that's where you can kind of start bringing in other things. When I'm writing, so I have adopted a fall writing mentality. So every fall, I start writing my next big project. So right now it's fall, and I am writing my next book. And I started it in September with prepping it. In October, I did all my plotting. And now in November, I started writing it. And my goal is by the end of the year to have my first rough draft done. So the way that I work that in is I get up an extra hour early.
yeah.
So I wake up an extra hour early and I spend that time writing. That's my writing time.
Okay.
And it is a sacrifice of sleep, but I've also gotten it to where, because I'm more efficient through the day now, I can actually go to bed earlier if I want to. Or if you've got an extra hour in the evening, you could always put your writing time there if that's better than in the morning. So it's just kind of replacing things like TV time with writing time. Just making the choice to do that. But definitely, you've got to plan it out. And if I miss a week of my weekly tasks, then I'm lost. I'm completely lost.
Wow. Okay. That's super helpful. So one of the things I'm interested in that response, so you talked about kind of time blocking your day, scheduling everything out. But it also sounds like you have like specific time in your year where you like, so you said you do the fall writing. So I'm curious, two-part question. First, do you do so are you like not writing the rest of the year, or is this just focus writing time? So I'm curious about that. And then also, like, do you have other seasons where you say, okay, for the spring, I'm going to focus on this, for example? Like, is your whole year like that, or is it just writing that's segmented out that way?
Yeah, so every end of year, I do my next year's planning out, and I like to plan things out 3 months at a time.
Okay.
So I'll usually have kind of a broad overall what I know my year is going to bring me for like my big projects without really breaking down each step and what needs to happen. And so then I set those goals first. And then from there is when I kind of start to piece everything in. So when I'm saying I'm writing in the fall, that means that I'm not doing any other big projects for myself. I'm only focused on writing. And my goal is finish the rough draft by the end of the year.
Mm,
Because if I can finish that by the end of the year, then when January comes, I can do my first round of edits and then move it forward to an editor. And so then while the editor has it, that frees me up to do other things too. And I am someone because I do everything creative, I need a break.
yeah.
So I only will do one writing project a year if it's a big one. Now, like for my blog and stuff, that's weekly. I mean, there's always going to be smaller writing projects that I'm doing
Sure.
on kind of like a week by week basis. But if it's a book and if it's towards a book, then I'm gonna be intentional about my time when I'm assigning that for my schedule.
I love that because I mean, I think about even like my world. So of course, my situation is a little bit different. I have a full-time corporate job. And I've got all the responsibilities that everybody has, family stuff, neighborhood stuff, all that kind of stuff. But I'm writing a book and doing this podcast. And I found that even those two things, oftentimes it's like there's not enough time. Like you got to choose one or the other. And it's like
Mhm.
I never know if I've got some extra time on Monday, well, should I write? Should I self-edit the book? Or I need to edit that podcast and schedule the next, like all so having that dedicated time and planning it out in advance, I think even just from a mental standpoint of like, okay, freeing yourself from the guilt of the opportunity
Mhm.
cost of not doing one or the other. Like, no, I already know, I've already budgeted this time for this task and this thing.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of framing it not just with your day or your week, but like even within the context of the year. Like this
Mhm.
season is going to be heavy focus on this project. I love that. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
It really helps to keep things moving too.
I'm sure. Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so couple questions, and then I'm gonna let you get out of here. First, are there any resources that you would recommend? So again, remember this podcast is for new and aspiring writers or people who are starting businesses of their own or things like that. But specifically, if you're talking to the authors, any resources, any tips or advice that you would share, and also think like podcasts, books, courses, things that have really helped you that you would recommend. And by the way, you can recommend your own stuff too if you have things that you want to offer.
Sure. So for books, I'm going to do a recommendation for fiction writers because when I was working on my romance book, the fiction world is much different than the nonfiction world.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult sometimes to come up with really good characters. And one thing that I have found that I love, it's called the emotional thesaurus. And then they also have like the emotional wound thesaurus. There's like a whole line of all these thesauruses. And they have just the best words in there that you can use to really try to shape your person. And they even have them that just cover so many different things. And so I really recommend that you get a couple of those in the areas that you struggle with when it
Mm,
comes to character building because the key to a good fiction book is to have great characters. You really need good characters that are believable, that people get connected to, and that kind of help draw into your story. And then from there, you can kind of build your world, you can do your plot and things like that. But the character building, I feel like a lot of people kind of struggle with because, a lot of times you only know what you know.
Right.
And so how do you create something from something you don't know? And so that's just a great resource that I have found and use quite a lot, actually.
That's awesome. That's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Mhm.
Okay, a couple more book questions. And these were not in the pre-game notes, so hopefully they don't catch you off guard. But I'm curious, what's your favorite book, and why is that one so great?
Oh, this is the hardest question for someone who is a reader.
Right, right.
And I've asked this question and they always say that to me too, and it really is. I'm gonna say, actually, it's a collection of poetry. So anything Edgar Allan Poe. He is my favorite poet, and I think because he's so raw and so emotional, and it was my first actual reading where I felt connected to the emotions and what I learned how emotion writing really is. And I think that there's just something really beautiful about that. Yes, his stuff is kind of sad and a little dark, but if you really look at it and really read through it, you can feel the emotion behind it. And I think that that's really hard to do. And so that's why that's my favorite.
I love it. Okay, one more book question, and this one's a true or false. The book is always better than the movie.
True.
No exceptions.
Uh, I mean, we just finished The Lord of the Rings, the TV show, and it was terrible. So, I mean,
Okay.
we've watched all of them. Harry Potter, like all the main ones, even some of the romance ones. Yeah, not great. One of my other favorite books is by Kristen Hanna. It's called Firefly Lane. They did that into a TV show, and while that was really great, it was missing parts from the book.
Yeah.
So it's really hard because usually I read the book before I watch the movie. I think maybe the only exception would be Message in a Bottle, which is a really old movie and a really old book by Nicholas Sparks. That
Okay.
movie was just really well done. But that would probably be my only exception.
Okay. Fair enough. All right. I just have one more question, and this one's super easy. How can people get in touch with you, follow along with what you're doing, order your book? Give me all your links, social media. How do people get in
Yeah,
touch?
sure. You can follow me on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at Shonda Ramsey Official. And my website is shondaramsey.com. Everything is pretty much there that you could ever want and need.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on today, Shonda. This has been so much fun, and I really appreciate you giving the time. This is great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've had a lot of fun.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you would do me a huge favor, if you got value out of this podcast, which I'm assuming maybe you did since you're still here, would you scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and rate and review the show? And maybe share it with someone on social media or with a friend, just in a conversation. It would mean so much to get this message out to more people, and I think it would be amazing if you would share it. So that would be, as a personal favor to me, I'd really love it. Also, if you want to know more about me and what I'm working on, you can visit my website. It's tcburr.com. I hope you'll check it out. You can contact me there. Thanks again, and I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.